Guys, my name is Lauren Hollows from NOI Education Services, and I am very happy to be able to bring you some free professional development in relationship to an overview of the RTO standards for 2023. Now, I've been running this course for a couple of years, and every year I go through and I update it with a couple of key things. So this year, we're going to be talking about the introduction of the draft RTO standards and some of the changes that may bring with it. We are also going to be talking about just my experiences in the most recent ASQA audits that I've been undertaking in the last couple of months, how the process has changed, and the kind of key areas that they are looking at now. And then also we're going to be bringing in some of the most recent audit reports as well. So recent audit reports from 2021, 2022, and 2023, so that you guys can start to understand what the regulator is looking at. And so you can think about that in terms of your own processes and what you may need to be focusing on in 2023. As always, please like and subscribe to our channels. Please follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube here. And if you do find this video helpful, you can like and comment below. All right, so let's kick into it. Okay, so just starting with an overview, looking at kind of where we're at now. So we are moving into, again, another updated ASQA model, and what they are now previously calling audits. We moved last year into calling performance assessments. You may also get compliance monitoring, but performance assessments tends to be the language that's being used at the moment. What's really important when you're preparing for audits is that we are looking at getting it right the first time around. So just as kind of like a structure thing, we've moved away from the 5 phases audit model, which was kind of that enrollment, marketing, training, assessment, completion sort of a model. And really what I'm seeing now as we're going through our audit reports is kind of just getting back to like those sort of key documents, the TAS, who are your trainers, what about the assessment? And the assessment is focused both on your tools, so on your tools, your mapping guides and things like that, as well as your completed student files, okay? And the completed student files are a bigger and bigger component, and the way that they're going about getting the information as to who they audit, they are a lot smarter about how they get that information. They're doing it much more in line with what we've seen previously in like state funding-based sorts of audits. It is still very much an evidence-based audit. Providers are audited on how they have implemented their tools and their processes rather than the processes and tools themselves. And from a penalties perspective, certainly they're like, in previous years, pre-COVID, we were looking at like having harsher penalties. There was not a lot of auditing being done during COVID because obviously everybody was just trying to adapt. And now certainly my experiences, again, this is just my experiences, is just that the process is really focused not so much on penalties, but a dialogue between the RTO and the regulator on how the business is managed in line with those RTO standards. And it's probably one of the first times that I've actually had the assessors acknowledge that it's a really good part of the professional development process, and that they are hoping that we will improve through the course of the audits, which I think is really, really positive. So just as like a bit of a timeline, so 2019, we had Mark Patterson leave ASQA, Saxon Rice was introduced. 2020, they announced there was going to be a big restructuring. COVID hit, new assessment model was introduced, and everything got moved to like a Zoom model, obviously COVID. 2023, we've obviously got the move to full fee cost recovery. So you can expect that if you are going to go through a performance assessment or a compliance monitoring audit, you are going to be charged for that. It's either $150 or $250 per hour per assessor. So you need to kind of, if you are going to be going through an addition to scope process, or if you are going to be going through a compliance monitoring audit, you need to kind of think about that in terms of your costs for your organization. Priorities have broadly remained the same. So trainers and assessors, who is conducting your training? Are they current? Online training, how is that being managed? Are you actually still observing skills? Are students able to demonstrate skills? International training, certainly with what we're expecting to see, which is a big kick up in the international market, there will be remain a strong focus on international training. Vet in schools, Funded training, that's primarily managed by the STAs, and they do have a lot of conversations between the STAs and with ASQA. That information is shared quite regularly. And then continuing that focus on high risk products, individual support, first aid, childcare, leadership and management hospitality. I know leadership and management hospitality might seem a little bit strange, but that's more of a volume issue, is the reason why the regulators choose to look at some of those sorts of things. All right, so kicking off into kind of marketing and enrollment, not a huge focus on these from what I've seen in audits. Really, it does go more to kind of the trainers and the training and assessment. I guess certainly with your STA audits, your state funding audits, and with your CRICOS audits, this becomes more important because it brings into account things like your relationships with agents and how you're very, very clearly explaining that to students. So when we're looking at being audited for marketing or enrollment, some of the systems that we're looking at, your marketing system, your enrollment system, how you manage your fees, refunds, any third parties that you may be working with, and what the feedback and auditing process is for each of those things, okay, particularly for like agents or third parties. Some of the forms and tools that they're going to be looking at, so they're going to be looking at your course guides, they're going to be looking at your website, they're going to be looking at your enrollment forms, they're going to be looking at any refunds that you've offered, looking at third party agreements, things like that. And an additional evidence to that would be, you know, student interviews. Yes, they do still undertake student interviews. If you do sit through an ASQA audit, one of the first things that you'll be asked for is a full contact list of all the students that have studied with you, depending on the scope in the last 6 to 12 months that have been active students within that period. And you are expected to be able to provide phone numbers and emails for all of those, and the regulator can contact any of them. So make sure that you've got a student management system, one that actually clearly documents all of that information. And then also obviously being aware that, you know, those students could be contacted. What do we need to do in order to do marketing and enrollment correctly? Okay, well, we need to firstly say what we do. So you need to very clearly explain how your programs are run in plain language, okay? So don't talk about what is the volume of learning and this is, you know, this is the volume of learning, this is the amount of training for the course. What you want to say is, how many days is the course? How many hours is the course? From the time the student starts the course to when they finish it, what is the duration of that period, right? So, you know, the course runs for a year. You will have 10 days face-to-face in class. You will be required to do a range of online, and you will have 5 or 6 workplace visits during that period. That is in plain language what the student needs to know and understand, okay? How will the assessment occur and what will the fees be? And when we say what will the fees be, again, we're explaining that in plain language. If it's $4,000 and you're going to charge $1,000 every 3 months, you know, what is the amount and how often is it going to be charged and how can the student pay for that? And obviously giving them the options. So we say what we do and then we do what we say. Okay, so if we have said that this is how we're going to run the course, this is what you need in order to sign up for the course, and this is going to be the charge of the course, then there shouldn't be any major surprises for the student after that. Oh, I didn't realize that I was going to have to find my own placement. Okay, oh, I didn't realize that there was a $500 resource fee because that wasn't listed in the marketing or in the enrollment forms. You know, students don't listen. They don't read a lot. You know, like if we give them a 20-page enrollment form, they're not going to read all of that. We really need to be clear in those kind of key points for students to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. No major surprises after training commences. Things that they may be asking in the student surveys, I'm not sure if the surveys are exactly the same. These are more from 2020. I don't think they changed. They used to provide it as part of the audit reports, and I haven't seen that happen recently, but it's, you know, it's good information to think about anyway. I wouldn't imagine they would have changed that much, but things like, did the training provider offer you incentives? Did the training provider promise or guarantee you would get a job? You cannot do that. Was there another organization involved in signing you up, third-party arrangements? Did you know the organization who signed you up for this course was not your training provider? My training provider gave me information that would meet my needs. I understood the study requirements. I understood the payment terms, all of this sort of thing, okay? All right, examples of non-compliances from recent audit reports. So the organization's marketing material did not contain the required codes and titles. So for example, if you're offering a Cert 3 in hospitality, you've actually got to break down all the units that are within that, okay? Marketing information did not provide an accurate representation of the services provided. So for example, it was a rolling intake course and there was no information provided that it was a rolling intake course. Marketing information did not explicitly outline that a third party was going to provide certification for the first aid. Okay, so all of those are things that you need to provide the student. If you go to clause 4.1, it really does provide you with like a dot point list of everything that should be in your marketing. It is worthwhile just going through and doing a spot check to make sure that you are actually, and you don't have to provide it all in the one form. Like you can have a flyer and then refer to a website and then have more comprehensive information on your website. That's fine, but you've got to be clear as to where they find that information. Okay, another one was the student's handbook stated for funded training, refunds will be made in accordance with state and territory legislation. This is common with national RTOs. You've actually got to provide specific information, okay? So what you could have put in there is like, please refer to website, refund section, or like, please refer to our refund policy, and your refund policy could have it all in there, okay? Okay, all right, we'll keep going. All right, so, oh, actually, sorry, no, enrollment. Okay, so the RTO did not provide students and prospective students with current and accurate information. So the TAS, the handbook, and the marketing did not align in relationship to course duration, amount of training, modes of study, course fees, charges payable. So there was like one fee on the website and then a different fee on the in the student handbook, et cetera, et cetera. So what we want to make sure is not just when we're auditing individual documents, but we're auditing documents as part of a whole system. So for example, we've got our training and assessment strategy, which says our duration, we've got our marketing, you know, and then we're actually like looking at how we're actually properly delivering the course. And so all of those things are kind of lining up to each other. So that's the sort of stuff that we really want to be looking at. Also on enrollment forms, we want to be making sure that like all fields were signed off. If they're under 18, they've got the parent signature. Again, very clear information about fees, like when fees are going to get paid, how much, that's really important. So that admin checking process, when you're receiving the form in and you're loading it into the system, it's really important that you're checking all those points. And certainly, you know, we've obviously just gone through our AVAT miss submission period, which was end of February for national providers. When you are enrolling the student, getting that USI created and validated as soon as the enrollment is processed, so that you are not left, you know, a couple of weeks before AVAT miss is due scrambling, or you can't issue a certificate because you haven't bothered to create the USI. Making sure that all of that sort of stuff is in at the beginning and that the enrollment is full and complete and has all the relevant information and evidence. That's really, really crucial to being able to set you up for a good process the entire way through. The USI, the best thing that you can do with students is on like at enrollment or day one of orientation with students, you actually want to get them to go into their USI records online and approve your RTO to be able to access their records. What that means is that your administrators will then be able to log into USI and pull that information whenever they need, as opposed to students, you know, providing the transcript, it getting lost, okay? Or, you know, students saying, oh, I didn't actually complete anything, but, you know, they forgot that they'd done a first aid course, you know, 2 years ago, that's still applicable, or, you know, all of these sorts of things. So make sure that you get that approval from the student in their USI records, and it actually makes your life a lot easier. Okay. All right, so learner support. So learner support currently is really only like 1.7, and there's actually no progression requirement in the current RTO standards. That's actually something that is going to look at changing when we get to the draft standards part. Okay, what learner support systems are about? That's about your complaints and appeals, and you should have a register and a policy in relationship to that. How you go about communicating with your students, you may have a communications policy, or you might just, choose to rely on evidence. And you should have a learner support policy. So I know generally, like when I'm working with RTOs, we've got a critical incident and learner support policy altogether, which goes into like all the different ways that we can support students should a whole range of different issues come up. Okay. Your forms and tools are going to be your learner support tools. So like if a student fails the LLN test, what process do you actually put in place to support that student? And then how, obviously, your complaints and appeals forms. Okay, complaints being like a complaint about the service, appeal being an appeal to an assessment outcome. Okay, and you'll want to have the completed forms. Again, student and staff interviews. They do a lot of staff interviews in the ASQA audits now, in the ASQA assessments now. Apologies. And then you've got your emails and your communications to staff. Okay, so these are things like when there's updates on training packages, when there's updates on assessments, when there's updates in policies. How are you communicating that information, or like you just dumping it into your student management system? Do you create the policy and update it on the website, or do you actually provide some sort of communication in and around that to your staff? Okay, again, types of questions. My providers ask me if I have any learning needs. I've received information about student support services. I know where I can get help. I know how to make a complaint, things like that. Now, with the new standards for 2023, learner support is going to become it's going to become more greater, and it's going to be more in line with what we've been providing in the CRICOS space for quite a while. Learners are treated fairly and are properly informed, protected, and supported. Okay, this is going to be a very interesting and challenging space for RTOs, but that is the language of the new draft standards. Learners have access to accurate and comprehensive information to support them to make informed decisions. Learners, the support that learners receive to undertake training is appropriate to their individual needs. Again, this is going to correlate back to, are we doing some sort of suitability assessment at the beginning? Are we doing some sort of LLN? There is a well-being and equity statement. So learner well-being is supported through access to support services, the delivery of training and assessment in an inclusive, equitable, and safe environment. So what this is going to rely on is probably like some upskilling for trainers in relationship to understanding how that language looks, and what that language looks like in a classroom, and setting some really clear policies. And my recommendation is just always to have a code of conduct. You have a code of conduct for your trainers, and you have a code of conduct for your students, so that we can make sure that we're all operating in a respectful environment. And it's about understanding that we will all make the effort to be respectful and supportive of each other. Feedbacks, complaints, and appeals. So learners are encouraged to provide feedback and have access to avenues for making complaints and appeals, and appropriate action is taken in response, which is not too different from the current language for complaints and appeals. But the statements in and around equity and that really strong focus on learner support, that learners are really strongly informed, that they understand how the training, how the assessment is going to occur, that they are treated fairly, and that, you've got to some extent equitable outcomes. There will need to be some changes to how RTOs provide that information. And certainly, like, one of the things that we're looking at is things like, what are some of the local support services in your areas that you can, refer to provide students. Like, there's a lot of online services that people can access nowadays. If students indicate, like, for example, they're a trainee that's studying with you, and they indicate that they're having an issue with work, can you direct them to Fair Work? Can you direct them to an an EAP? Can you, if they're if they say that they're struggling with home life or that they may be depressed. You know, are there other support services? Like, they're not expecting you as the trainer, you as the admin, you as the RTO to necessarily provide counseling to them. You're not qualified to do that, but, you know, can you refer them to services where they can get some of that support? So that's some of the things that they will be looking at. Okay, now we're going to get into the guts of it. So this is absolutely the guts of any ASQA performance assessment, of any RTO, and that is your training and assessment strategies. Are they relevant to industry? How you undertake your assessment? Do you validate your assessment? And do the people that do your assessment, do they have the current industry skills and knowledge? So we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. I'm just going to put everything on pause and I will be back with you guys in just a minute. Okay, guys, let's get back into it. Okay, all right, so your key areas, your training and assessment strategies, the assessment, do you validate the assessment, and your trainers. Okay, so the new RTO draft standards are actually not that different. I don't think that there's a huge change in relationship to how this is all going to work. If anything, I actually think for trainers in particular, it's probably going to be a little bit easier. But basically, training and assessment enables learners to gain industry relevant skills and knowledge. I think that that's something that we can all agree on makes sense. Training is consistent with training products and it reflects industry needs and supports learners. Again, we go back to that support component to achieve the training outcomes. So I guess one of the things that I want to highlight here is once you've agreed to take on a student, once you've accepted that student's enrollment, you are responsible for supporting the student. If there were things that you didn't do beforehand, like you didn't do an LLN, and then all of a sudden the student's LLN skills are not sufficient to get them through the qualification, that's kind of on you now because you guys didn't do the checks in the beginning that you were supposed to do. So it's really important that you are thinking about that. From an assessment, learners' skills and knowledge are assessed in a way that is fair, appropriate, and assessment outcomes are reliable. And we're going to get into that in a lot of detail. Facilities, equipment, and resources are safe, fit for purpose, and support the delivery of training outcomes. Okay, so if you are planning on delivering a Cert 3 in commercial cookery and you don't have a kitchen, okay, ASQA is going to ask you why that is. You need to have access to a commercial kitchen if you're going to be delivering that. If you're delivering first aid, you need to have access to the first aid equipment. You need to have first aid dummies. If you are delivering individual support, you need to have a facility that is fit for purpose to deliver individual support. Okay, so you need to have the facilities, you need to have the equipment, you need to have the resources. And in order for you guys to show that you have that, there needs to be like a resource checklist or something along those lines that you can go, okay, this is the resource checklist, this is our facility, you know, or we're going to go and do it out in the workplace. And this is our workplace checklist of everything that we make sure that the workplace has before we go out there. Okay, there's got to be like a list. Recognition of prior learning and credit transfer. So learners are supported to progress through the training product where they have existing skills, knowledge, and competencies. So this is going to be quite, again, I think this is probably a little bit new in that we actually really do need to have conversations with students beforehand as to whether or not they've done any training, what are the skills that they have, document that information. And if they have done the qualification or part of the qualification or another something before that, that needs to be documented and checked. Again, this is going back to that process of having the student give you access to their USI. If they've done any training in the last 8 years, it is going to be on their USI record. 2015 is when the USI came in. It's going to be on their record. When you sit down and you do an enrollment with a student, log into USI, download the transcript, make admin's life so much easier because you shouldn't be charging students if they've got credit transfer. You shouldn't be making them do the units again. You know, it is important to have this information before we start. Okay, So amount of training, facilities and resources, is it compliant to the training package requirements? So one of the areas where I see this going wrong all the time is when an RTO has imported a unit and then that unit supersedes, and there's been so many like BSB, SIT, CHC, all of these things have superseded in the last couple of years. If you've imported units and they've now superseded and they're outside of their teach-out period, you need to bring the new unit in. Okay, which means you need to update the student's training plan, which means you need to make sure you're not issuing certificates with units that the student can no longer do because it's outside of teach out. So you need to have a system in place to show, like, to make sure that you're checking for those sorts of things. And then you need to have a process in place for like how you're going to update students when these sorts of things occur to switch out to the new units. All right. So a TAS is a live document. It explains how the course is actually run. Okay, here are some of the common non-compliances, and these are from like 2022 audit reports. So the organization's documented TAS did not separate training from assessment. So when you put together your TAS, you should have, here's the training that's happening, here's the assessment that's happening, you know, and then even I always break up that training. Here's the face-to-face training that's occurring. Here is the self-study that we expect the students to do. Here's the classroom-based training. Here's the workplace-based training. So we separate all of those things to very clearly show how the course is actually run. Okay. The organization refers to volume of learning, amount of training, nominal hours. However, at no point do they say the actual weeks and hours allocated to delivery and assessment. And at times it's not sufficiently clear or it's inconsistent. So again, in your first statement, nice, clear language. This course is delivered over 12 months. There are 10 days in the classroom. There are 4 workplace visits. Classroom days are over 8 hours. Okay, so clearly articulate all of that in that nice first clean sentence. So like, how does your course run, you know, in one sentence, and then break it down unit by unit. And you can include things like your volume of learning, your amount of training, your nominal hours, things like that. ASQA does not generally care about nominal hours. In my experience, that's more of a state funding issue, but, you know, please be consistent and clear. Please clearly provide the duration. Please clearly provide the amount of face-to-face hours that are being delivered. The organization has not provided a rationale, educational justification, or data to support the proposed amount of training. So for example, you're delivering a Cert 3 in hospitality. That's not the apprenticeship, that's the traineeship. You're saying that you're going to deliver it over 3 months to a group of 18-year-olds with, you know, maybe a couple, you know, maybe some experience in the hospitality industry. Okay, how have you come to the rationale that that's appropriate, right? Now you may say, well, they're going to be doing it 5 days a week in class, like they're going to be doing it 5 days a week in combination of, you know, with, you know, 3 days a week in a working in class and 2 days a week in a restaurant. Okay. Yep, probably that's fine. That's probably actually okay to be doing that in that period of time, you know, for even for that cohort. But you very clearly explain like how you're going to be working fairly intensively with them. You know, on the other hand, if you say, oh, well, they're going to do it, you know, 2 years and it's all online and we do, you know, 2 days in the classroom at the end to knock out all the practical assessments. Okay. Again, for people who don't have any experience, that's probably not going to work. Maybe for people who, you know, are doing this kind of like as an assessment only pathway because they've got like 5 years experience in the workplace and they're really comfortable studying online, you know, maybe you could make that work. I don't know. Maybe if you were doing the assessment one-on-one, you may be able to knock it out. I'm not sure. But, you know, you have to provide a rationale for like the group that you're training, the cohort that you're training, and how your training meets the training package needs. Okay, and when we go through some of the non-compliances in the assessment section, you guys will understand like how all of this stuff starts to play into each other. And then the documented TAS for the delivery was not consistent. Okay, so again, TAS doesn't meet the delivery schedules, doesn't meet the marketing materials, doesn't meet the actual course duration from the students, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, you know, again, coming up under this, like this is where you can kind of have multiple things that pile onto each other. The trainers didn't have the level of knowledge being provided, so therefore they're one of the resources that you were missing, okay, in relationship to your TAS. All right, so this is kind of the most important part. This is the main thing that ASQA will audit you on. It is standard 1.8, okay? Assessment in line with the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. And I know that there's been some debate online, but really the assessment, the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence are not really changing. They're pretty much staying as they are. If you do not know them, if you are a trainer and assessor and you cannot tell me what the principles of assessment, rules of evidence are, if you are the CEO of an organization and you cannot tell me what the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence are in an audit, I'm going to be like, that's not very impressive. So, okay, examples of non-compliances, all right? Systematic issue with third-party observations. Third-party observations are not a primary form of evidence. If that is what you are relying on to sign off on competency, your RTO is more than likely non-compliant. I can think of one circumstance where I've seen it, where they had to rely on third-party observations and they did it in a way that was really robust. Outside of that, every other RTO I've ever seen, not good enough. Fails audit every time. Okay. For example, but not limited to, the instrument does not provide clear guidance and instruction on when, how often, and over what period of time evidence is going to be collected. Okay, this is when you just copy and paste the performance criteria in and expect your trainers to come up with some sort of assessment as to providing any sort of guidance or context. Okay. Incorrect and missing unit of competency codes and titles. No assessment context. Like the amount of times I've seen no assessment context, like in an audit report. Okay, if I had $5 for every time, like I'd be able to buy a really nice watch or something like that. Like it's a lot. So in the knowledge-based assessments, questions were wrongly answered. So question 6 was incorrect, but the learner was deemed competent anyway. And this is just like trainers, guys, you just, I get it. You're marking. It's human error, but this is where the trainer admin relationship is really important. Trainers, before you submit it into admin, just do that quick double check and make sure that you've like properly checked over everything. In admin, you are gatekeepers. So this is where like you just need to be looking at things and going that, you know, if you are regularly looking at it, you'll look at it and you'll go, that doesn't look right. Okay. Or if it's missing. Okay. Other assessment records had no date, had not been signed by an assessor, you know, missing signatures. This is something admin can pick up really easily. Okay, this one was an interesting one. I am happy to make this PDF available for anyone who is interested and wants to like read these in detail. If you like, and comment below and put in your email address, I will send you a PDF copy of this whole presentation and you can read all of these in more detail. Okay. In this case, it's in relationship to work placement. Okay. So, and specifically, so the supervisor and third-party reports, there wasn't any guidance on who was a suitable third party. Okay, again, very, very common. Assessment stated that they needed to have 3 observation checklists. So this is the CCAS 015 unit. It requires 120 hours of workplace learning. And what they're saying is that over that 120 hours, an assessor needs to go out on 3 occasions, okay, to conduct the observations. The supervisor has signed off the student as having been observed for only one of the required workplace observations. All completed observation checklists had exactly the same single completion date of the 26th of September 2020 at the time 3:35 to 4:35. These observations comprised 19 individual discrete job-related tasks. So what we're basically saying is the document itself says you need to go out there probably 3 times, okay? You need to complete at least 2 workplace observations. Instead, the trainer's gone out there, they've gone out there once, they've gone out there for an hour, and they've signed off this whole giant document, okay, that had 19 individual job-related tasks in it. And they've signed the entire thing off in an hour. And a smart auditor has looked at that and gone, that's not possible. ASQA assessors, despite what some consultants will tell you, are not idiots. It does not take a lot to look at that and go, I don't need to know what the 19 tasks were to know that you cannot observe all of these things in 1 hour and deem nearly the whole damn qualification competent, okay? So thinking about these sorts of things, like this is where validation is very, very important. That should have been picked up at the validation stage, at the, by the admin who was entering it in, okay? And then it should have been passed on to the manager, and the manager should have gone and ripped the assessor a new one, okay? And gone, this is not good enough. We don't do this shit. Okay, continuing on. I'm very passionate about this. Conversation. So this was actually a really good comment to see on an audit report. Conversations with trainer X and CEO X demonstrated that assessors are selecting practical assessment scenarios based on individual cohorts, developing complex scenarios based on personal experience and knowledge of industry operating conditions, ensuring consistent implementation of the assessment system by having new trainers delivering training assessment under observation of another trainer, using established scenarios, and but just not reporting the above practices. So in this particular case, the conversations that the regulator had with the trainers was like, we actually can see you guys are really trying to do the right thing. You're just not documenting it like strongly enough. You're not recording that evidence strongly enough. So that was like it was actually like a positive thing, because they were going, we can see that you're trying to do the right thing. We just need you to tighten up the evidence component. Okay, this is going to become more and more common in the world of AI. Further, the student's response to question 16 is identical to the response provided in the solutions manual and cannot be confirmed as the student's own work. The student's response to question 17 is significantly inconsistent with the model response, okay, yet the assessor has marked it satisfactory. So this is where things like online assessment in Accelerate, I like, because when your assessor is marking, the assessment answer is right there next to it. It's why you should, the first time that you're marking new tools, you should always have your assessor guide out there so that you can kind of see what the benchmark responses are supposed to be. Okay. Review of the organization's assessment system identified it was not valid. Specifically, it didn't cover all of these things below, didn't cover selecting and wearing PPE, didn't cover consulting with authorized persons, didn't cover clean, check, maintain, and store tools and equipment, did not contain a single performance benchmark for the maintenance of tools or equipment. Okay, therefore, not valid. Okay, students' work cannot be authenticated as being the student's own work, as their response to 10.2 reflects a level of literacy significantly higher than that evidenced by the student's written responses in the pre-enrollment and pre-course interviews. The evidence submitted by the student was not sufficient to be able to determine that the task had been completed satisfactorily, not consistent with the solutions manual, your assessor guide, yet the assessor had marked them as satisfactory. Okay, guys, so in the world of AI, in our current world of ChatGPT, okay, if you have a student who, when they are handwriting or when they, first speak to you, has a very low level of literacy, and then all of a sudden you start to see these responses come through from the students that are quite articulate and well written, For those of us that work with ChatGPT, I can look at a response and I can tell you whether or not ChatGPT wrote it. ChatGPT actually has its own like tone of voice, and it has its own way of responding to questions and things like that. So, you know, for example, if you ask it a question, it will kind of repeat the question in a response, and then it will dot point its reasons for it, right? So for those, like if you've ever worked with ChatGPT, and trainers, I suggest that you do go and have some interactions with ChatGPT. Pop in a couple of your questions into ChatGPT to see how it works. You'll get familiar with the tone and the voice that he uses, right? Similarly to that, you should be, if you have a relationship with your students, you should be able to tell when your student has moved from their tone of voice and their language response to ChatGPT. Okay, I do this with my kids all the time. I homeschool, as many of you know. I have my kids using ChatGPT as a tool. I can tell when they've written something, and I can tell when ChatGPT has written something, and I can tell when they've taken ChatGPT as a base, manipulated it, and then produced something that is, you know, their own content, right? So if you are familiar with your students, you should be able to pick this up. I can't see any scenario where you have a relationship with a student and you actually can't tell when they've submitted ChatGPT. It's a very distinct tone of voice and language and way of writing. Okay, this is just yet another example. But yes, okay, cool. So trainers and assessors. Okay, so we'll get on to the next part. So just going back to principles of assessment, rules of evidence. So I guess if I was a trainer, here's a couple of things that I want to make sure I'm doing. One, I'm not having my, I'm not doing my theory assessments in class as a group discussion. Okay, and if I am having them in class as a group discussion, you need to be very careful with how you structure that so that your students are actually providing authentic responses. Okay. Two, when I'm validating or when I'm checking over responses, every so often get like 3 of the students from your class and whack them in front of you and answer question 1, question 1, question 1, question 2, question 2, question 2, question 3, question 3, question 3. By doing this, what you're going to find out is you're going to find out whether or not your students are colluding with each other, okay? And have a relationship with your students. And by have a relationship, I mean, get to know their knowledge and skills. Do not have any sort of other relationship with them. That's a no-no. But get to know your students, get to know their tone, their pace, their type of language, so that you can identify when they go off book, okay? You know, it doesn't take too long to kind of pick up on that stuff if you're a trainer, okay? Make sure that before you submit it, you just go through and do that double check again. Have I answered every question? Have I ticked every box? And work with your curriculum development to find ways to document comments and document context that doesn't require you to write page upon page upon page. As many of you know, we use job cards. We'll be doing some more training on that later on in the year, but you know, that's just something to look at and think about. Okay, so trainers, competent, current, TAE, industry. Okay, competent, you have your TAE. Competent in your industry, you hold the units that you're delivering, or you hold, you can demonstrate that you hold similar currencies, okay, and that you've got the experience. Currency, you have done that thing, okay, in the last however many things. So you have done marketing in the last 6 months, because marketing changes every 6 months, okay? If you haven't done marketing for 4 years and you're telling me you're current and you're not marketing for an organization online, I'm going to call bullshit. You know, if you are a mechanic, okay, here's a project that I do at, you know, here's me fixing up my car at home, or here's me, you know, helping fix a car for a neighbor, or here's me returning back to industry. You know, any of those sorts of things. So we want to know that you've done it in a recent period, and your industry consultation is what's going to determine that period. Okay, because as I said, if it's IT and cybersecurity, it's like 3 months. It's like a 3-month period. Like, it's crazy how fast it turns over. Marketing and sales is, again, another area consistently turning over. Like, the sales and the marketing techniques that we used, you know, even 3 or 4 years ago are completely out of date now. If it's childcare, or, you know, being a butcher, or being a chef, you know, the currency period is longer because there's a lot of the basics have really remained the same. And then there's just kind of like some technology updates, things like that, that are a little bit different that we have to work through. Okay. When we're evidencing that, trainer matrix, okay, TAE stuff at the top, how you're managing your TAE stuff. This is a great example of that. Again, like, if you guys want to get a certificate of attainment from us, again, comment your name and your email below, or you can email laura@noi.org. We'll send you a quick assessment, and then we can send you a certificate to show that you've done this professional development with us, and that takes care of your vet currency for this year. Okay. But you got to do it, and you got to document it. Okay. And then again, like, if anyone needs a trainer matrix template, again, just comment in the box below, and we'll send you out our trainer matrix template. Okay, so here's some examples of non-compliances. So while XXX achieved their equivalent qualification to demonstrate vocational competence, so basically what that means is that they actually have a qualification which is equivalent. So it's generally like an older version. So, like, you know, again, you might be delivering the SIT 30622 Cert 3 in hospitality, but you've got your 16 version, or you've got the, you know, the 13 version or something like that, right? Evidence provided does not demonstrate that he has current industry skills for food processing. The relevant qualification was achieved under an apprenticeship arrangement in 2014, indicating he was working at industry in the time. However, no evidence was provided to support his work history since that date. So what they're basically saying is, well, we can see that you have the skills and that you were doing this thing, you know, 6 or 7 years ago from when this particular, I think this is 2022 audit report. So 8 years ago. But we can't see that you've done anything since. Evidence provided to support industry currency includes reading of newsletters, reviewing of content books, and setting up observation kits for students to use. Current industry knowledge and skills does not describe how these activities relate to the linked units, okay? Which means that basically, like, he's provided a statement which goes, well, I trade it every day, and so therefore I'm current in it. And that doesn't fly with the regulators. And I understand why it doesn't fly. And the reason why it doesn't fly, guys, is because you could be crap at that now, and your students don't know it. And so if you're crap at it, there's no one there telling you, oh, whoa, that's actually not how we do it. Okay. And reading about it is only one, like, piece of the puzzle. So what you actually need is, you actually need to be doing it in industry, or you need to be doing it for a customer, or you need to be doing it in an environment where there is somebody else who does have industry currency, who is observing you and going, yes, that's correct. That's the correct process to follow. That particular thing hasn't changed, right? Or yes, you are doing that safely. Yes, you are mindful while you are doing that. Yes, that final product is coming to, you know, is at industry standards. There's a lot of skills that if you don't use them, you lose them. Okay. And so if you haven't undertaken proper welding in the last 10 years, you know, you've only kind of done a quick demo for kids who don't know anything. We don't know if you're doing that up to date. Whereas if you've done it for another, you know, for your industry current trainer, or if industry has come in and they've validated your skills, or if you've gone out into a workplace and you've, you know, you've completed a project for a client, there's that third party validation that that skill that you're doing is still being done, you know, to industry expectations. Okay. And that's what we need to see. We need to see that happening. So evidence provided to support industry currency includes a reading of news, combined with the lack of evidence to support work history. The provider has not provided sufficient evidence to support industry current skills directly related to the training and assessment being provided. Okay, so we've got to make sure that we are doing these things. Okay, the organization has not demonstrated for the above training product that it has implemented a program that allows all trainers to undertake professional development. Okay, again, are you please don't just put it in your trainer contracts and say, you as the trainer are responsible for managing your own professional development. It's not good practice. The quality of your trainers is the quality of the training that your students are going to get. So you have to invest in your trainers in order for your trainers to invest in the students. So please make sure that you have a plan to provide professional development to your staff. That's really important. Okay, so that kind of covers some of the big training and assessment, components. When it comes to completion, okay, so 3.1 is audited more frequently, and this is where your completed student files come into place. Okay, your RTO must have controls in place to ensure qualifications, statements of attainment, and record of results are not issued unless the student has completed all assessment requirements. Inappropriately issued certification poses a significant risk to your RTO's reputation and to the vet sector. To reduce this risk, you should have systems in place to ensure that certification is only issued to students that have fully demonstrated competence in all training product requirements. Evidence of this can be demonstrated before you issue the certificate. Get the whole file together. And when I say file, it needs to look like this. It needs to be fat. Get that whole file together, okay? Double check everything. Make sure all the evidence is there. Make sure the units are correct. Make sure the start and end dates are correct, especially if you're doing state funding, okay? Every start date is correct. Every finish date is correct. All of the assessments are in there. All of the signatures are in there. We have the enrollment form. We have a driver's license. We have a Medicare card. Everything is correct. It all matches up to the student management system. We've got everything there. When you click that button to say issue that certificate, you should be damn sure that you are happy to take that file and submit it for audit. That's what you want to be able to do. If you can't do that, if there is something missing, admin, please go to your supervisor, go to your manager, go to the trainer and go, hey, this is missing. We can't deem it competent yet. We've got to make sure we've got everything in there, because that's how we're going to increase the reputation of the vet sector, is by providing that training and being able to demonstrate to regulators that we know what we're doing as private RTOs, as TAFEs, things like that. Okay. And when it doesn't, this is what they say. They say evidence of behaviors demonstrated by the RTO demonstrates the assessment practices and systems do not ensure that the RTO issues documentation to a learner whom it is assessed as meeting the requirements. Okay. It's not good. It's not something that we want to see. All right. So guys, that is kind of our overview for 2023. I got to be honest, there's not really a whole lot that's different from 2022 or 2021 or 2020 or 2019. They are much better on how they are auditing. I've really enjoyed the ASQA audit, ASQA performance assessment processes that I've been through so far. In my experience, the people that I've been working with, they know what they're talking about. They do understand the principles of assessment. So again, this is just my experience, but I like what I'm seeing from ASQA at the moment. I think it's really good. It's a great interactive process. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, as I said, please like, comment below. If you want a PD certificate from today, all you need to do is comment your full name and in your email address, and we will email out to you a form. You can fill it back in and we will send you a certificate for your vet PD for standard 1.13 to 1.16. Anyway, if you guys like this, if you want more of this sort of content, please let me know. I hope you found it helpful. I am Lauren Hollows from NOI Education Services. Have a great day.